Should be on by now. Sorry about that. Okay, everyone can hear me. We just said the opening prayer for those of you out in internet land. I'm going to do something that's a little bit different. I have I have a video that I want to show today. One of the reasons is, normally we're not a Time magazine type church or anything like that, but I had an individual that used to work for me. Okay, he quit work so that he could become so that he and his wife could become missionaries to Papua New Guinea. Okay. And as missionaries, they were functioning on the indigenous church principle. They would go places, they would evangelize and try and set up pastors there, okay? He's been there for a while. I think it's about 3 years, okay? And he came back to the States for their kind of sabbatical to come back and take care of issues here at home, okay? And while he was here, he was coughing a little bit and was having some problems, with headaches. So he went to the doctor. He wanted to take advantage of seeing a doctor while he was here. While he was here, okay, it was discovered that he had a stage 4 lung cancer that had metastasized into his brain. Okay, and so what I want to play for you is I want to remind you that when we talk about advancing in ranks, when we talk about the pivot, when we talk about the church, it's not just this church, it's a church universal. And we need to support other individuals. We do that through our prayer meeting, which we've added other individuals on our prayer meeting. But sometimes we don't look outside these 4 walls. And while I'm not going to, turn the church into a situation like a lot of churches where, I do teach from time or I take topical things, what I did want to do is I wanted to share with you this individual's attitude, okay, towards his current condition and towards his status as a believer. Okay, this individual goes to Grace Bible Church. Okay, I was missing the fellowship part. Goes to Grace Bible Church, which teaches some pretty good doctrine, as evidenced by this individual's response, and by the pastor has some opening words beforehand. Okay, but I thought it would be a great opportunity for us to once again be reminded of, why isn't this see if it's going to work. No, that's not working. Well, maybe we aren't. Did it come apart? What if we call up the PowerPoint? Does that come on? Well, it died during your Okay, let's go ahead and go on. And hopefully this is still...
First, I do just want to say that we are doing well by God's grace. We are doing well. It's been a week, and there's so much to be thankful for. So much that we are praising God for. So much grace that we see in this past week. And we just want to say thanks to all of you guys. We've just seen the love of the body. We've seen the love of friends spring up in all of it. So we felt it. And it's truly just been a week where we are grieving in this trial and yet rejoicing in the salvation of our God.
Can you guys hear that?
And just the love of these things. A few years ago, a season of our marriage, there was a time where Cam and I were talking about ways that we were afraid of death. Cameron brought up, I am afraid of dying of death by work. Yeah, it is appropriate to laugh at that statement. I mean, she is no longer in this place. And I think it was technically plane crash in the ocean followed by death by work away. My response to the husband was, listen, you died death by work away. That would clearly be the Lord's will for your life. But how can you argue with that, right? And it's true. And you know, I'm standing here. We've been 4 months in the country from Papua New Guinea, and to just hear the doctor say, "Hey, stage 4 lung cancer." How can we argue with this? You know, this is clearly the Lord's will for our life. When Job stood there, and you know, servant after servant came and was just giving him bad news, he clearly knew that was the Lord's will for his life. And he just responded with, "Hey, naked I came in, you know, to this world. Naked I'm going to return. You know, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. This is God's will for our lives, and we recognize that." And I wanted to just share like a couple ways that we've seen just the goodness of God in these circumstances. And I'm going to associate both of them with just a story from Papua New Guinea. Because who doesn't like hearing about Papua New Guinea, right? First, one of the times when we were trying to find a village to move into and preach the gospel to, Zach and I were on one of the hardest hikes I had ever been on up to that point. We were hiking up to Gilboam, and we left at 3 in the morning.
Yes, 2 young sons.
From sea level, we hiked up to I think like 5,000 feet. We hiked back down to maybe 2,000 feet. Then we hiked back up to 4,000. And we got there at like 6 p.m. and I just laid down on the floor as soon as we got there and slept till 6 a.m. the next morning. But I remember on this hike, as we're hiking, I'm so exhausted. I mean, maybe 1 in the afternoon, I'm so exhausted. I just am like, I can't do this, you know? And I sat down and I put my head in my hands and I just thought, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I putting myself through all this pain and suffering? And the next morning I opened the Bible and I reminded myself about the gospel. And it was like, this is why, you know? And it's worth it. You know, all the pain that I must suffer so that these people that we're meeting, they just might hear about Jesus Christ. They just might repent and believe and know the one true God who is infinitely merciful. I mean, man, this is anything that it costs me, any pain that I must suffer. I mean, this is all just totally worth it. You know? And seeing similarly in this situation, you know, we're just as I laid in bed this past week, you know, seemingly watching many things in my life pass away, maybe. You know, I just thought, man, is this the best plan? And my response was that I can confidently say this is the best plan. I mean, God is infinitely wise. God is infinitely good. And this isn't what we were thinking. I mean, I don't think anybody was thinking this. But I mean, this is God's plan. And we've just constantly been reminded how undeserving we are of anything. You know, we came to this world with nothing. We're leaving with nothing. We have already received grace upon grace in this life. Nobody promised 37 years of hell. You know, 36 is great. And,
He's 36, obviously.
Our biggest problem is not cancer, right? And our biggest problem by far is not cancer. Our biggest problem is my sin. My sin was my biggest problem. And that has been taken away. My biggest problem was that I was a slave of my sin. I was dead in my transgressions and sin. I was under the wrath of God. And that God, His grace and mercy at the cross of Jesus Christ took my wrath so that I could be His son, so that He could adopt me and declare me righteous. I mean, that problem is gone. So cancer is just little in comparison, very little in comparison. So we just give glory to God, the goodness that He's shown us in this. Another story from Papua New Guinea. We had some hard times in Papua New Guinea, hard situations, hard circumstances. And I remember when Zach and Jeremy and I, when we were going through various things, I would just pray, God, please make this stop. This is still hard times. And yet, after they were all over, Zach, Jeremy, and I would sit down, we talk about those times, and we remember them with such fondness. Because there was such dependence. There was so much just like seeking the Lord in those times. We just laughed and it seemed like everything was okay. And so similarly in this situation, I mean, just seeing. I wake up in the morning and I'm praying prayers that I've never prayed before. Like, God, thank you for another day. Thank you for another day that I'm alive. God, please help me to make it through this day. And just seeing this dependence upon the Lord that God has created in this situation that He has sovereignly and wisely and goodly given us is again just kindness and the goodness of God. And sometimes I just think, why can't it always be like this? Why can't I just wake up every morning and just be so thankful for another day and so dependent upon the Lord to help me make it through this day? I mean, sometimes we just need a trial to stir things up. A trial to just stir up our love for each other. And so we're thankful for that. And if I have to be that guy, I'm okay with it. I'm happy to be that guy so it leads us to love the Lord more and to love each other more and just be dependent on God. We're really thankful for the opportunity to go through this. So those are two ways that we've just seen God's goodness, and then I could list so many ways that we've just been so thankful and so worshipful this past week. It has only been a week, though. It has been a week, and all we're dealing with right now is information. It's information that probably has been true for quite some time, probably has surprisingly quite some time. And so I know in the coming days and the coming months, or things will get harder. Things go down like they should. Things will get harder. Life will get harder. We will need more prayer. We will need God's grace in the difficult moments as well. I think my family will need much prayer, as she will bear the brunt of the load and burden. Our kids will need much prayer, and so we just ask you guys to keep praying for us, and in all of this, I just think we can praise God. We came into the world with nothing, we're leaving with nothing. The Lord is good, and we can praise Him. And a couple other things you guys can just be praying for.
So anyway, I thought when I saw that, one, having known the guy but personally, but two, that's an attitude that we that I talk about, that I say we ought to have. The fact that we understand that God, has a plan for us. We don't always know exactly what that plan is, but we should be grateful for the plan. Here's an individual who's absolutely oriented in terms of, hey, this is God's plan. I can't fight it. I've got it. And I got it. It must be God's plan for me. He still has hope. You heard him say, as I watched, things in my life fade away, maybe, right? So he's still praying. He would like to see that he sees 737 instead of just 36. Like I said, he has 2 children and obviously, his wife. He's concerned about his wife. But the attitude and the fact that it's associated with grace. He understands grace. Okay. Now compare this to some individuals that you've seen in the past, or that you've known in the past, who to them, when they get the sentence that they have cancer, they fall all apart. They go in 100 different directions. Which one is going under dying grace, and which one's going under the sin unto death? if they're both believers. I just thought this was a fantastic example of an individual who's got enough maturity, understands, certainly understands salvation, understands justification, understands the importance of God. Yeah, he uses words. He's a little bit, different than we are from the standpoint of, some of the way he expressed love. Okay, for example, but to me, I wanted you guys to see this because there are other individuals outside these four walls, okay, that are functioning, that are getting information. And that should be hopeful to all of us. Because sometimes when we look around and we see the size here and we go, wow, are we different? Are we wrong? What's going on? It's refreshing to see an individual, okay, who understands. And what I would ask is that we go ahead. I didn't hear about this until after we had prayer meeting, but I'd ask that you put he and his family, please, on your prayer lists. Okay, this is an individual that certainly deserves prayer, deserves everything that we can pray for. Okay, the other thing is because they were in Papua New Guinea. Okay, they had a lot of their stuff over there. Okay, they were just coming back. It was only supposed to be a 6-month visit here. Okay, so they left everything over there, so they don't have anything. Okay, and they were planning on shipping it. Okay, but it's costly to ship it, and he doesn't have those funds anymore because those funds are going to be gobbled up probably very quickly by health expenses. Right, so one of the things he goes on, I didn't want to continue to play it because we have our own class to go into, but he has asked, that you pray for them that they be able to have some of the basic necessities. They currently are staying in an apartment with some friends, but they're going to need their own place as the sickness goes on, right? And they're going to need, he asks his congregation, this is like I say, it's a church, he's speaking to his church, if they have, appliances that they're not using or whatever, if they could get some basic things. Okay, so keep that in your prayers as well too, that not only he but his family, his wife and 2 kids are also taken care of. Okay, so I thought that was a good example, and I thought it was important for us to see that. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead, with all that being said, and pick up. Okay, we are talking, I thought it fit in very well too when we talk about the will of God. We talk about what is the will of God. Okay, how do we know what the will of God is? I thought his example with the orca whale was pretty funny. The fear of death thing was kind of interesting, but the fear of dying by orca whale, in his comment back to his wife, well, if you die by orca whale, you definitely know it was the will of God, right? Because it's not a whole lot of people have a plane crash in the ocean and they get killed by an orca whale. Anyway, so it's a kind of a humorous way to talk about the will of God, which is our topic here, the will of God. Okay. So, verses 15 and 16 together, just to get us running again, together say, for such is the will of the God, that the ones continually producing divine good produce it in order to muzzle, silence the spiritual ignorance of the foolish men, producing divine good as free men, and not having, using your freedom as a facade for the evil, but producing divine good as a slave of God. Okay? So analysis. Point 1. In these 2 verses, comma, plug your ears, this machine really likes to announce that it's going off.
Powering off.
Okay. In these 2 verses, Peter is summarizing the information concerning our orientation to divine authority. In the form of our function in the nation as well as leading into the next section on authority orientation. He is giving us additional information associated with the foundational concept of orientation to authority, period. Sure, he is giving us additional information associated with the foundational concept of orientation to authority. In other words, what I'm saying is that, you know, in these two phrases, in this one sentence, two verses, he is telling us, okay, one of the key things to the will of God, to produce divine good, right? We have some very basic, the will of God is very, very basic, okay? How it applies to you, okay, is a little bit more intricate. And it's intricate because it's how are you going to use the doctrine that you learn. But basically, the will of God consists of some very pointed things, right? You have to get doctrine. You have to use your volition correctly. You should actually start those, you know, they build on each other, right? You start out using your volition. By using your volition, you get doctrine. By getting doctrine, you can apply it and function properly. By functioning properly, you stay inside the divine dynasphere, and while you're in the divine dynasphere, you produce divine good. While you're producing divine good, you're silencing and witnessing. You're functioning as an ambassador and as a priest. That gives you blessing in time. Continued function gives you blessing in eternity. So it's fairly easy, okay, to understand what it is. It's a little bit more difficult because it requires doctrinal information and how to apply it, okay? But we shouldn't be surprised, right? As human beings, that's what the way everything is in life. You want to be a good musician, you have to learn the foundational information upon which music is built. And then you can learn key concepts, key styles, you know, until you finally develop your own style, okay? So it's really easy when you think of the concepts of any particular avocation. They usually have just a couple of concepts on them, but it's the application of those concepts. It's the same thing in our spiritual life. Point 2, Peter starts off by once again focusing the believer on God. And in this case, on the will of God. He starts off, quote, for such, end quote, to get us to perk up our ears and then he follows this the status quo verb, quote, is, period, end quote. This verb is an absolute. The will of God is an absolute. It does not waver. And it does not vary. That's why that's so silly that you have this concept of gender fluidity, for example. You know, these are the people who are trying to say, they've taken the idea that there are no absolutes, right? We live in this gray swamp with neither good nor evil, neither right nor wrong. And now we have neither male nor female, right? We have this fluidity that's completely antithetic to God. God says, this is right, this is wrong. Okay? This is good, this is evil. You are male, you are female. Okay? So, point 3. Then Peter gives us the phrase, comma, quote, the will of God, period, end quote. For such is the will of God. As believers, we have studied this. Remember, I gave us a category on the will of God, the different types of the will, what theologically we call the will of God. But as believers, we've studied this, and we should know what it is. Period. The will of God is simple for the believer, comma, but it requires a lot of doctrine to fully understand and adapt to it. The simple will of God is that the believer apply and execute doctrine, comma, staying in the divine dynasphere, and producing divine good, period. This requires several things, colon. So point A. First, comma, the believer must have and understand doctrine, period. You cannot have divine guidance without doctrine, period. See, people, for some reason, the word divine sets them off. You know, they start thinking, ooh, mystically, right? You know, we're talking about a certain type of information. It's information that's spiritually understood, but it's still information, okay? There's nothing magical about it. There's certainly something powerful about it, okay? But I have run into, and you probably will run into someday, and Jack used to talk about those individuals, right, who when they wanted divine guidance, they would pull out their Bible, they would close their eyes, flip it open, and point on the finger, right? First they pray and say, God, tell me what I need to know. Boink, and point, you know, and they'd get some esoteric verse that they would try to morph into somehow giving them directions, you know, that are supposed to control their life. Now, everybody here I know has gone through school, okay? How many times in school would it have been effective to say, ooh, I've got a test tomorrow. I won't do anything. I won't study. I won't learn the information. It's an open book exam. I'm just going to go into class tomorrow, and I'm going to go, okay, here's this question. Okay, let me find the answer. I'm going to close the book, and I'm going to open the book. I'm going to flip through some pages, and I'm going to point. You'd be an idiot. You're a spiritual idiot when you do the same thing. You get the information. We get it a little at a time, here and there, and repeated and over, and add concept on concept, and doctrine on doctrine, and application on application. That's how you get divine guidance. It doesn't come in a dream. Oh God, what should I do about this? And oh, I woke up the next morning and, you know, I had this dream. God told me to move to Timbuktu. And, you know, if I ate the right kinds of plants, I would be blessed with the right thing in my life. Eh? You know, you had a dream associated with your stomach and being hungry or something. Yeah. But the idea is we don't get divine guidance apart from having doctrine. Okay? So first, the believer must have and understand doctrine. You cannot have divine guidance without doctrine. I gave you that sentence, right? This means that you have to get doctrine. And get it on a regular, repetitive basis. We review a lot. We hit the same concepts many times. Again, if you went to school, you're learning a particular topic, you don't just cover it once. Not if you're trying to learn. Now, I got to admit, I did go to school with people whose concept was, I'm going to pass the test. That was their focus in going to class, was just to get through it and pass the test. As opposed to those individuals who said, I want to learn the information. See, if you went in with the mindset that said, I want to learn the information, it didn't matter what test they gave you. If you knew the information, you'd pass the test. That's the problem with educating to pass tests. Remember, that was the whole fight against the state tests, right? Is that if you had the test that the kids had to take and you taught them the answers to the test, that's all they ever learned was the answer to that test. They never got knowledge. They just got information. Well, that's what we need to do. We have to have the information and we have to review it. You know, the people that just do it to pass the test, once they get past the test, guess what? Whoosh, they forget it. It goes away. Hey, why do I need it? I passed the test. You know, maybe there's a comprehensive final, but, you know, I'll go back and review it then. Or maybe I'll keep it long enough, and then after the final, kavoosh, I flush it. Right? I learned this really clearly in one class that I had at the university. Right, we had a new teacher who'd come from Bell Labs, very smart guy. Okay, and he was going to teach us a class, and it was in the fall semester. Okay, and so he gives us some information stuff, and the very first test, okay, was a booger. And the reason it was a booger, okay, was because it had math that we would have learned in the spring semester. The problem was there was a summer. And people didn't, you didn't review during the summer, right? You know, and so he gives us this test, and everybody's looking at it going, uh-oh, I've got this equation, and it's an equation that I don't remember. I know I learned how to solve at one point. I don't know how to solve it, right? And so when we got our test back, it was kind of funny because several people had two grades on their test, right? The first grade was like a 30, right? And then the next grade was like maybe an 85. Right? And so I asked him, well, how come there's two grades on some of these papers? And his basic answer was, well, because I expected you people to know this stuff, that you actually were learning it and not just trying to pass a test last semester, and that you would have it. And so when I gave you this test, right, I went to grade it, and the first test I graded, and there was this one guy that was always in every one of my classes, and he was always acing everything, right? And he happened to be the first exam that this professor graded. He goes, so when I graded his test and he got everything right, it was 100, I thought, woohoo, my assumption was right. People are going to know this. And then the next 30 tests that I graded, no one knew how to solve that equation. They got it to that equation. That's as far as they got. I realized, well, maybe I'd better grade it on a curve. So we spent the next week reviewing the math that we needed to have to solve this test, right? Anyway, that's why we review. We review so that you have this information, so that when it comes up, you know it. You don't have to go, oh, where was that? That was last semester. That was last year. That was last whatever, okay? So this means that you have to get doctrine and get it on a regular, repetitive basis. Continue the point. You have to understand the concepts and terminology of the doctrine. That is why we spend so much time defining and using technical vocabulary. If you don't understand the vocabulary, you can't understand the doctrine, period. See, many people don't understand the importance between vocabulary and thinking. If all you have is three-letter vocabularies or four-letter vocabularies, okay, then you're not going to be able to think very well, right? If you don't believe that, and many people don't, many people say, oh, no, we think in pictures. We're a pictorial language. We think in pictures. We can do this in pictures. Okay? First of all, someday you ought to try the exercise where you try to describe to somebody what a spiral is. Okay? You can picture it in your mind. How do you communicate it? But the bigger point is, what countries in the world have not advanced? Those that have rudimentary languages. When you go to the deepest, darkest part of Africa, where they have clicks and ticks for a language, they don't have science. Compare that to the very technical languages of German. We were talking about that, talked about it earlier today, where if you didn't have the word you needed, you made the word you need. But you increased the language and you made it technical. Compare us and the language and the technology, the language and the terminology that we use and how confident you are on your doctrine versus the individual who studies the picture book of the Bible. You may know the quote-unquote stories, but you can't apply anything. It's language. I had an example here that I said, if I said it, there's another person in the room might get it, but I said, if I said conductivity is the reciprocal of resistivity and conductance is the reciprocal of resistance, it probably wouldn't mean a thing to any of you, or very few of you, unless you knew, of course, what conductivity, resistivity, conductance, and resistance pertain to. I have books. My grandfather was a steam engineer, back in the teens. He was in World War I when on a steamship, and after he got out, he got his license to be a steam engineer on commercial boats, right? And so I have a whole bunch of books that talk about how steam engines work. Can I read them and understand them? Not very well. It talks about certain types of coal and how fast that coal burns and how much coal you need, to go on a particular trip when you've got so much ballast in a tanker that's got so much cargo and what you're going to need to get back. And, it has all of this stuff, and it does it all in technical vocabulary. I don't understand it. Okay? People take that for granted, that, gee, that's not my field of study. I therefore don't need to understand it. But as a believer, doctrine is your primary field of study. So you better understand the language. We saw that last week when we had to define what the soul is. Many congregations have no concept of a soul, what it means. They don't understand what righteousness really means. They don't understand what justification really means. Just as if I've never sinned. No, that's not what it means. The things that we talk about in communion take a long time because we use, technical vocabulary, but it's important. That's how we get what we need. That's how we determine God's will. Okay? To use doctrine, you have to understand it, and you have to understand all of it. Okay? So continue the point. You must understand foundational doctrine. Such as the person and work of the Lord Jesus Christ. Rebound. Divine dynasphere. Etc. See, all of these are foundational things. You don't even have the beginnings of that. You don't know how to stay in the divine dynasphere. You're never going to produce divine good. In this case, what's the will of God? To produce divine good. So you better figure out how to do it. Okay? Subpoint B. Next, once the believer gets the foundational information, comma, he must continue to get more advanced doctrine and grow to maturity. Again, think about the secular world. If you stayed using the same vocabulary you learned in first grade, where would you be? You have to learn more and more information. And the parents who do their job right teach their kids how to learn, teach their kids how to think, teach their kids how to use logic and apply principle after principle in a way that they don't deviate from what makes sense and what's truth. You don't teach them what to think, you teach them how to think. That's what the Bible does for us. It starts off with the what to think, the foundational information, and then we get doctrine upon doctrine upon doctrine that we can apply, and then we get to use it in our personal lives. The way you use a particular doctrine is going to be dependent on what challenges you face. That same doctrine may be applied differently by me based on the challenges that I face. But the doctrine is the doctrine. Okay? So, next, once the believer gets the foundational information, you must continue to get advanced doctrine and to grow to maturity. Because the will of God is applying doctrine in your life, comma, and because your life consists of many types and categories, of blessings and trials, comma, you need to have a full and complete arsenal of doctrine at your disposal in order to fully execute the will of God. I try to use examples that make sense here, but so one of the examples I think of here is when I think of Legos. Okay, Legos come. Those of you that know what Legos are, those little blocks, that kids and adults play with. Okay, Legos come in many different shapes and sizes. But if you get a bag of Legos, that's all the little skinny thing that only has 2 little dots on it. It's really, really hard to make anything, right? If you want to make something, you need a full arsenal. You need a full bag that has the entire variety. Okay? You can't do everything you would like to do with just the 2 little dots. Sometimes you need 1 dot. Sometimes you need 20. Sometimes you need a whole sheet. That's why we have different doctrines. That's why we don't stop with salvation and go over salvation and go over salvation and go over salvation, and that's it on a Sunday basis. You're saved. You got that. We need to move on. We need to give you the information you need to do the will of God, to function properly. When you say arsenal, we talk about God, the Holy Spirit, uses the doctrine that you have to ward, to fight off, help you fight off, okay? Satan in the angelic conflict. You need to give him, as Jack used to say, more than just a toothpick. You need to have a whole arsenal. Sometimes you have to be silent and use a knife. Sometimes it doesn't matter. You have to attack them all at once and use a bomb. You need to have all of that, figuratively speaking, of course. Okay. So, arsenal of doctrine at your disposal in order to fully execute the will of God. For example, to understand the will of God, for your life, with respect to marriage, you need to understand the concept of right man, right woman. Semicolon. You need to understand the role of the man and the role of the woman, comma. You need to understand authority and responsibility. With respect to both partners in the marriage, comma. You need to understand. Went too fast? Okay. How far did you get? Okay. Comma. Okay. You need to understand authority and responsibility. With respect to both partners in the marriage, comma. As brought out very clearly, for example, we've talked about before, where the woman is supposed to obey the husband and the husband is supposed to love the woman. He is an authority over her. Does that make him smarter than her? No, never says that. But he has responsibility for her. Therefore, he has to have authority over her. When he says, don't do that, she's not supposed to do that, whatever that is. And he's not supposed to do that as a tyrant. He's supposed to do it as protection. Don't go out with those females, friends of yours, by yourself. They're trouble. She says, no, I don't believe you. I'm going to disrespect your authority. I'm going to go out anyway. And then she gets drunk. She meets a nice guy, a hunk. She has an affair, and there goes the marriage. The man wasn't doing it to keep her from having fun, quote unquote. He was keeping it as authority to protect the two of them in marriage, which is one example. Okay? But women in today's society misunderstand the concept of authority, and they tend to think that those under authority, if you're under authority, it means you're stupid. It means you're less of a person than the person who has authority over you. Therefore, you're talking down to me. I need to be equal with you. In fact, you know what? I need to be better than you. And since I'm not, I'm going to go march on the Capitol. I'm going to make the government make me better than you. Okay? I'm going to make sure that every commercial on TV shows me better than you. Okay? Those kinds of things. Okay? Anyway, authority and responsibility with respect to both partners in the marriage, comma. You need to understand the proper role of sex in the marriage, comma. Classic example of that is the woman who decides to hold her husband hostage from sex until she gets what she wants. You're not going to buy me the new car? Hope you like sleeping on the couch. You're not going to buy me that, well, I was going to say new kitchen, but those kind of women don't care about the kitchen. You're not going to support me and my friends in this activity? Then fine. Hope you like sleeping on the couch. The Bible says her body is not her own. But it also says his body is not his own. So guess what? You can't rape in marriage. Now, our legal system doesn't believe that. Okay? And a properly oriented man is not going to be abusive. Okay? But the Bible is very clear on the sexual relationship and the intercourse relationship between a man and a woman. There's sex in the Bible. Okay? So, anyway, understand the proper role of sex in the marriage, comma. I'm going to quit saying now, you need to understand, I'm just going to give you the of, okay? Comma. Of money in the marriage, comma. There used to be a statistic years ago that said more divorces were over the fact that money was not handled correctly in a marriage than almost anything else, including infidelity. Arguing over money. Right man, right woman need to understand the concept of money and the concept of money in marriage. Priority. What should it go towards? Okay? Of family and children, etc. Period. We have one more sentence and we'll finish this point, which will actually finish the class. To perform the will of God with respect to your job, you have another whole set of doctrines, colon. Right job, comma. See, the whole concept of right job went out the window when somehow job became a status symbol. And so now you have people who would be their happiest being working for waste management and being the garbage collector, who looks at it and says, oh gee, that's down here, I can't do that. Society calls that a horrible job. I need to be the CEO of ... And so they try to become the CEO of ... and it's not their right job, and they're miserable their entire life. Or the other way around. Someone who's supposed to be the CEO and says, oh man, I don't want all that responsibility. I don't want all of that. I think I'm going to stay here as the janitor. Okay. And he hates cleaning toilets, and he hates mopping floors, and he hates picking up waste. But it beats being in the boardroom and having to fight with responsibility. That's someone who doesn't understand right job, right? So, right job, comma, right location, comma. Yeah, I've got this job opportunity in Alaska, the very far reaches of Alaska. I'm not going to be able to get church, and I can't get any internet, but you know what? I'll take my Bible with me. We're good. No, we saw in James that that's wrong, okay? So, you have another whole set of doctrines, colon, right job, comma, right location, comma, authority orientation, comma, etc. So we have authority orientation in that perspective, because very many people say, oh, gee, my boss is dumber than I am, and therefore, you know, I can't be under his authority. No, you're under his authority. You have proper authority orientation, and you pray about it. It's good testing ground, right? That individual's name was Matt Dodd, by the way. You know, Matt had a good point when he said sometimes you need the tests to focus you on what's important in life, doctrine and God. To be able to pray and say, gee, I've got another day. I love that line. Nobody promised 37 years of good health. Okay, so we'll be ready to pick up with point C, where we're going to talk about more about, obviously, the will of God. This is a really good study. There's a lot of information here that Peter has led us into. Okay, so that being said, we are going to sing from the folders again. And this time, we are going to sing song number 22.